Should be going live in, come on. Sorry, it does take a minute sometimes. Right, there we go. We should be live. All right, welcome everybody to this Tuesday, November the 12th edition of the OpenJS Foundation Cross Project Council meeting. I'm your host, Joy Burson, today, standing in for Giuseppe. As we get started, let me ask the group, are there any announcements we would like to share with our community today? Usually that's me chiming in with 100 things. Okay, hearing none, I'll just make one more pitch that we're moving into Collab Summit / Node.js Interactive crunch time. So do please submit your proposals for the summit or for the community corner and get your tickets to Interactive because we'd love to see you there. All right. First issue of the day is issue number 398, onboarding meta questions. This was my issue, I believe. And we had a bit of back and forth on this thread, but the question was raised where certain onboarding related topics should live, whether they should live, continue to live on this CPC repository or on the new onboarding repository. And then the second question was on the required files if we wanted to enforce some uniformity of naming, such as code of conduct or versus COC, or if we were okay with projects having some variation in naming. Looked like on the issue that people preferred some uniformity of file naming, so I think that seems like we'll proceed with that approach unless there's any concern or input. Otherwise, any comments on that? Nope. Okay. Then the other issue was on where things should live over the on onboarding topics. Should they be moved to that onboarding repo or just the issue specific? I think Toby was and Michael were raising some good points. It seems like what we need to do is document this practice of perhaps anything being specific or needing specific CPC interaction, to put that in the onboarding repository, but if stuff that's more specific to individual projects would be fine to live on those and within the project repositories. Is there any other discussion or input that the group here would like to have on this, or are we okay with just sort of like moving forward with that approach and finding a place to document this?
Yeah, sorry for chiming in a bit late. I think this ties to this other issue that I filed, which I'm trying to figure out which number it is right now without ruining the work I'm doing on this other issue. I think it's 400. And there's a question of like basically how sort of like in general the whole onboarding process should happen from a perspective of like communication channels. How do you get people to how do you get the foundation staff to get involved with a particular issue? How do you get the CPC to get involved with this particular issue? And I think we don't have a really good answer to that right now, because if you look at sort of where we're going with this in issue 400, it requires like sharing a bunch of different access levels to the different repositories. And I think like it would be really good to have sort of like a clear process here for how to proceed.
I think that's a really good point related to access. Like if certain folks, foundation staff or CPC members, need to be interacting with projects on, say, the CLA or DCL implementation or something like that, getting them access to repositories for just the single purpose is probably not the pattern we want to promote. So perhaps thinking about it from that pattern perspective is the right approach. So that's very good feedback, Toby. And I agree, it's related to number 400. So to move this forward, I think this is one of the things that perhaps Brian and myself and you can chat about also later this afternoon if we get a chance as well.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Because I think maybe what needs to happen is we can kind of workshop this and then have a proposal for the rest of the org to.
Yeah, I think what would be great would also have the same sort of like question to a very small single repository project and sort of find something that works for both, because obviously AMP with its 40 plus repositories is sort of like, one end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different beast, as they say. Good point. Okay, cool. So I think that sounds like a good next step, absent a lot of the other folks who were participating on that thread. Without other input, I think I'll move us on to issue number 390, next on our list. Collab Summit sessions. This was Joe Seppi's issue to start to kind of organize and think about different sessions that the Cross Project Council could host for during the Collab Summit in Montreal. I think he also left an issue about or a comment about this on today's issue. Let me go read that really quick. So no, he did not. I do think probably the next step here is just that we want more input from the broader CPC on what sessions the CPC ought to run and whether there are individuals from the CPC who would like to lead sessions at Collab Summit. I know Sindil is interested in leading the session for the standards working group. So please do weigh in on that issue if you want to help organize the CPC's presence there. Moving us on to issue number 383. This is just a heads up review of the ComCom charter update. Per our last meeting, this was to be left open for the 14-day governance period, and that would have basically ended today, I think.
I think it's next week, since it's been 7 days since our last meeting. Yeah.
7 days. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this has got one more week to go, unless, of course, we have enough plus ones from voting CPC members to close the issue beforehand. So if you haven't already done so, give that thing a +1 so we can get her done.
Genuinely appreciate it for those who do. And also, if you do have questions or concerns, feel free to comment or reach out to me or any of the other ComCom members. More than happy to help answer those and address them if they exist. So.
All right. All right, the next one is number 379. Let's see, this one is our COC proposal to stage 3. The action item from last week after discussion was that a subset of us from the CPC as well as Nina from AMP were to meet and discuss their feedback. We did that on Thursday of last week.
Friday.
Friday, thank you. It's such a blur. Friday of last week. And it was a pretty productive conversation, and there were a number of action items that came out of that, including just sort of finding some things that we could make more clear. So Nina and Michael were going to work on some updates and then come back with the revisions. Neither of them are here, so, and I don't, looking here, I'm not sure that they have all been accomplished. Go ahead, Toby.
Yeah, are there minutes for that meeting? Because I'd love to see minutes for that meeting.
Yes, there are.
Could you share them somewhere, or have
Yes.
someone from that meeting share them, like on the issue or something? That
Yeah.
would be like a first thing that would be great. And the second thing is, I saw that Nana published, sent a pull request to the contributor covenant itself.
That's right. Yeah. So,
and I'm very concerned about the timing of that, to be very blunt.
About that landing in time for
anything, really.
It seems unlikely that that will happen quickly.
Right. So I'm just wondering if that's the plan, to wait for this, or if there's like another plan, or so maybe having the minutes would be great. I don't think that we have to talk about the whole thing, but maybe having the minutes, and just like if there were, if there's like a plan B, and this is not the, if like this is plan A and there's a plan B that's sort of could happen in a more reasonable time frame, I'd love to be aware of it.
So I just dropped in the chat a link to those notes. And Tierney was also on that call, so he can hopefully chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. But the intention was, or the discussion was about sort of improving the upstream COC, if possible, and if that is not possible, to incorporate changes on our version of it, but like kind of in that sort of spirit of open source, submitting the changes we'd like to see upstream, and see if if there's a chance for getting that landed.
Yep. Yeah, that was exactly my experience, my understanding of what happened in the meeting. And also, yeah, I just shared my experience with actually contributing back, because I had raised an issue during the 2 CPC meetings before, I believe, maybe the previous one. Sorry if there's a lot of wind. That basically during that meeting, we were discussing the reasoning for having the link to the COC rather than actually committing it. And in that meeting, during that, I just created an issue saying, hey, it'd be nice if we had the translations available in the actual core COC. And Coraline had responded very fast. And suggested that, yeah, that's relative, she seemed open to it, or they seemed open to it. And so I shared that experience as well of they seem relatively open to having community contributions. And so I was trying to be encouraging in that spirit of open source of, this seems like a project that's relatively willing to accept improvements. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that extra information.
Yeah, no problem.
So just looking over at the issue or the pull request on the contributor covenant, it looks like there are at least a couple of folks from this community reviewing there. Do we want to maybe put a like a times box on this and say if we're not able to see these changes incorporated in, say, another week, that we sort of make our changes and proceed?
The one caveat there is if we require every project to adopt the foundation's code of conduct, and we're making changes within a week, do we have any indication that we have to notify projects that their code of conduct is changing? Because like, as a member of the node moderation team, that is something that's like relatively important for me to know, and for the other members of the team to know, especially given that, given that there's 32 projects that all have theoretically agreed to this code of conduct, and a week may or may not be enough time to kind of alert them of that.
So, okay, so I see what you're saying. So right now we have a pull request into the upstream code of conduct that we're consuming. And so whether Coraline merges that in or not is not really something that we can necessarily control. Yep. But either way, we do need to let the project communities know that these are revisions that we're planning to take, whether they land in the contributor covenant or whether they end up landing in our version of it.
Yeah, and I also do think it would be a good discussion to have of like, if we are having our own kind of modified version, whether like if that lands or before that lands or until that lands. That would also be a good discussion to have, because our current assertion is that we follow the contributor covenant 1.4. Like that is the framing of it. So if we're modifying that, we also want to be sure that we're letting our ecosystem know and our community members know.
Tuni, can I ask you whether you'd be willing to take that back to the node moderation team for just heads up and also review? I think that's something worth sending out also in our weekly project email, just to make sure that if anybody has concerns with these changes, although it doesn't seem like they will, but never say never, that at least they're weighing in on that early. But I take your point that we need to let folks know that.
If I may, given that, maybe giving it a bit more than a week sounds more reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds fine for me as well.
Yeah. I just want to also respect like the need to not sit on this for,
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. It's just like, I think I don't know if this is documented, but this may be a gray area that we want to ungray.
Yeah.
Is more of kind of what I'm trying to poke at, because like, I know if I had my own project that was like in the foundation, which I know there are a few people who own a project, and then all of a sudden the COC was changed out from under me after having the message. And I'm not saying like maliciously, but just like the COC was changed and I was not able to have, time in a week or two to review it.
Yeah.
I'd want to know. So like, maybe this is something that we want to disambiguate for the future.
Yeah, this is a good point. And it just speaks to a longer term system that needs to be kind of developed where, we have like a process or a protocol when a change is being suggested to the code of conduct, that we have like a webinar or some sort of discussion for projects to be able to interpret those changes and that kind of thing. So
yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, and for what it's like, I'm not trying to block or stall, and I apologize if it comes off that way. This is just something that is like, I think relatively important for us as a community to make sure we're not messing up or and make sure we are getting right. So that's all I want to make sure here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, it really does not feel like you're blocking on my side, just for clarity.
Okay, awesome.
Right.
It's just, this is hard.
Yep.
Who'd have thunk it? Okay, good points and good questions. So I'll take the action item to make sure that a message goes out about these changes being considered to the projects. Tierney's going to talk to the moderation team for our node, and we're going to try and get a better assessment of the likelihood of these changes being incorporated in the upstream contributor covenant.
Yeah, and then lastly, you want to maybe file an issue, something to have a process in place for changing the COC in the future.
Yes. Okay. Good chat. Other comments or questions from Mike or Evan or Gary, Chris, Robin?
Nothing for mine.
Actually, no questions from my end.
Okay. I didn't want to leave you out. Let's see. Moving on then. We're going to go to issue number 331, which is administering project applications, which is still tagged. Let me just go refresh. So this has still been open because we want to make sure that we're capturing a tooling, like any tooling suggestions. The last update that we had on this last week was that we have the public onboarding repository, and we were looking to create a private repository for tracking applications. But I don't think that I don't actually know why we can't have a private repository. Brian Warner probably knows. And I think I told you.
I believe the last I heard on that, and I could be missing some context here, but was that we have requested it, like the upgrade from GitHub, but have not received it yet.
Aha, okay.
That's the context I have.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Would you like a help from outside? Because we just went through the whole process for AMP, and it was I think pretty seamless, and took like less than a day.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely not been the timeline we've experienced. So
I believe, and this is, I believe we have that capacity now because
Okay.
Brian and I are collaborating on a repository for the brand and artwork for projects, and that is marked private. So I think we have that now. So I'll just check in with him. He had to drop for reasons, but if I can just create that private repository for us, then this issue may be able to be closed. And that would be awesome. If that's all we're waiting on. All right. Responsible security disclosures, I can speak. That's issue number 326. And Michael Dawson has been kind of keeping us apprised of the node security working group here. I'm just gonna check in really quickly, see if anybody else has has any update or any context beyond what Michael has been reporting in the issue. Okay, hearing none, I think that we just have to table this one until Michael can report on the work there. Then our last issue is post bootstrap work. But actually, before we go there, there was one other issue that Joe asked for us to take up, which is the +1 for a PR for Christian Broman becoming a regular member. This has met the 14 days and had plenty of +1s. So if there's not any objections, then I'm going to close that for us, or merge and merge the pull request and be done with this.
Go for it.
Cool. All right. All right. Okay. Done. All right. Then let's go on over to that post bootstrap board. Actually, that is not the board, that is an issue. All right, cool. We have a couple of things that are waiting on the board still. Being sans Brian Warner, I'm not sure if we're gonna have, and Michael and Chris. I'm not sure if we were really gonna get an update on this today. And we have the project directed funding, which I know has been in discussion for a while. But I don't think we have any updates because our board reps are not here. As well as move JSF CLA bot to the new foundation. That, let me see.
Excuse me.
Who's that?
Evan. So I was just wondering, the post bootstrap label has, or the subsection has, new Zoom, YouTube, and so on. Does that mean that we're getting new channels since this is tied to the old one?
Let me see. Hold on. Let me go see where you're pointing at. New Zoom. So we currently have a Zoom account and a YouTube account that are OpenJS Foundation specific. So I think those are just should be checked off. We do have a process that needs to be documented for projects who want their own project specific Zoom accounts. But the foundation itself does have Zoom and YouTube already set up for OpenJS.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So that's what the new Zoom and YouTube checkbox is.
So I'm realizing that this issue is being tagged as this post bootstrap work issues is what's getting tagged in the agenda, but the thing we should really be looking at, because it's the most up to date, is this post bootstrap housekeeping board, which I'll drop into the chat really quick. This is really keeping track of the open issues that we had tagged. But I think it's worth going back through that checklist really quick too. Evan, thank you for that. Let me go.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know that we actually had split that up, so it's not notifying that.
Yeah. So let me go click on. So on the board anyway, on the project board, which I guess we'll start with that because there's fewer things on it. Again, these things that are tagged waiting on board, unfortunately, the representatives, CPC representatives who have been reporting on those issues aren't here today. So unfortunately, we will miss out on an update this week. So it's moving over to the in progress. We have two open issues. The first one is add admin policy docs. And this is something that Joe was working on. And I'm not sure where he's at on that. I did assign this issue to him. Earlier it was just Ben, so that's been at least assigned. I would assume that Joe and Ben would appreciate help on this. It seems like a largely administrativa type task. So if somebody wants to volunteer to just help get that done, then that'd probably be warmly welcome. And then this next issue, number 291, review foundation infrastructure and rethink how we manage it. This issue is actually related to a few other of the live ones. We have a issue number 333, which includes a link to the draft infra services pull request to get everybody's feedback on sort of those minimum services that we want the foundation to adopt. I'm actually going to go click in there because I haven't seen. And there's been some feedback that needs to be incorporated, I see. So I can make those changes, but I would really love anybody to weigh in with thoughts or questions to clarify this document a bit and let us know if there could be any improvements. So that's that right there in the chat.
Is Joe here today?
Pardon?
I'm sorry.
Oh. Thoughts on any of our post-bootstrap board pieces? Okay.
I think the first add admin policy docs, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's really tied up to the working group. So somebody that has, or like at least part of the working group work that people have been involved in. So it's probably better that these people are dealing with that because they have more experience in that field. So for the working group requirement, it might make sense that Michael would be heavily weighing in on that since he's more active on that.
Yeah, sure. That's true. Still, I'm sure that if somebody wanted to volunteer and then just like, for example, poke Michael for review or something, that might be a way to unblock and just keep that moving as opposed to assign it to already very busy people. Okay, let's go take a look at that issue that Evan pointed out that has the checklist. And that's issue 115, because I think that was confusing. Okay, bye, Gary. Have a wonderful day. I just saw Gary was leaving, sorry. The post-bootstrap issue number 115, there is the bullet with the check marks. Evan pointed out that some of these things are probably done. So ask projects to start updating references to docs in admin repo. So that is an issue that I think should probably just move on over to onboarding, because this is an onboarding task. I think that the ask has been made. It's just it's not all been done.
Yeah, that was the issues that you posted on each CPC project.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I think we can probably move that and probably close that issue, but we'll see. We do have the new Zoom and the new YouTube, so that's something we can check off. Document/define initial process for handling reports to OpenJSF. I believe that issue was closed because we turned most of these bullet points into issues. I'm going to go double check. Yeah, I think because we do have an initial process. I don't know. How do we feel about closing that, leaving that open, or just waiting for later to make an assessment on checking that box off?
If we're insecure, then probably just wait out to next meeting when there's more people.
Okay.
To weigh in.
All right. I'm cool with that. We know that the next three are still open because we just discussed those. Complete language for project exit clause. That is still open. Draft initial process for electing voting members from non-impact projects. I believe that was done. Let me go double check. Does anybody remember that off the top of their head? Okay, I think it was, but I'm not certain, so I kind of want to leave it open just to be safe. Yeah. Any strong feelings on that? Okay, just better safe than sorry, probably. So I'll leave it unchecked for now. And then add entry point for projects wanting to join on the README and review project progression. So we have certainly made a number of updates to project progression, and I believe that it was added on the README because I yeah, if you were interested. So that was done. Okay, cool.
Okay, great. I was actually just browsing through and just, like checking, and then you say, yeah.
All right, cool. So I think then we have just managed to check off a couple of things, and I think we can check off a couple more. But I want to make sure that others agree that those were completed there. So I think we're nearly done with that checklist. We have gone through the post Bootstrap board. Is there any other business that CPC members want to bring today? We have 15 minutes remaining. If not, then we can go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually had the two issues that I tagged in the project onboarding repository that Joe suggested we bring to the meeting today.
Okay, great. Let me bounce on over there.
So I've pasted the link in the chat. There are issues 30 and 31.
30 and 31. Okay, cool beans. Nobody says that. Checklist deadline for Collab Summit graduation.
So just to quickly explain this one, one of the suggestions that was made was for AMP to graduate by the Collab Summit in Montreal in December this year. That does imply that the CPC have a vote before then, and I don't know what the process for that is, know what time is needed. And I'm just trying to work back from this date to even decide whether that date is reasonable or not. My belief is increasingly that that date is not reasonable, and the conversation we had about the COC before tends to push me further in that direction. And so I just want to, I would like to have an idea of what this actually implies on the CPC side, so I know not to rush everyone to meet the deadline that we just can't meet.
Yes, very valid and good concerns. So the question specifically is,
well, there's a graduation process.
yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah.
I think that boils down. That's the basis of the question.
Yeah, well, and I was thinking about it from like from the voting standpoint. So we do have a document that describes somewhere, let me see if I can find it, how we want to kind of proceed with votes when we do need to take that last vote. Oh, let's see if I can find this. And if anybody else knows where it is, that would be dope. Okay, well, I'm having trouble finding this PR that I believe exists that starts to address that concern, Toby, but I don't exactly know where it is. I think it's clear we need to, that this is a immediate need and improvement. So we should.
I found the project, sorry. I found the project progression, if that's relevant.
Oh, thank you. Maybe.
It's in the chat.
Thank you. So we have a process. We do that. The project presents to the CPC for final acceptance via 2/3 supermajority vote, and appropriate initial stage is determined. Because that's essentially where we're at right now. We're working with AMP specifically. We're going through the process of adhering to the onboarding checklist. That's the stage that we're at right now. And then step 8, the presentation for final acceptance and 2/3 supermajority vote is the last piece. That doesn't probably give us the level of detail that we're looking for, does it, Toby?
I don't think it does. I mean, well, I don't know what the supermajority means. Is it is it from like members present at a meeting? Is it from the whole CPC?
Yeah, it's of the CPC, which is the regular and voting members, I believe, is what the intention is there. So that's 15. Sorry, no.
So that's an async vote in that case.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that means that there's at least, what is it, 2 weeks?
No, not necessarily. I think because for some of the projects that have been moving out of the silent period into incubation, we've been getting the requisite number of votes within a matter of a couple of days.
I thought we were not voting on that. I mean, the CPC was not voting on this.
They're not plus ones, I should say, to move the project. So what I'm saying is people have been really responsive in the asynchronous sort of call for comment. And
okay.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that I don't think it has to take 2 weeks, and I don't think I don't know that we should time box a vote and say we have to wait 2 weeks. If we've got all the votes counted, then why should we wait 2 weeks?
Yeah, sure, I agree. If like you have the majority after like 2 days.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have the super majority after 2 days, you're good.
Yeah. So the other piece of your kind of your question, I think, is about the feasibility of getting this done by the Collab Summit.
Yeah, that wasn't really the question. I mean, I'm increasingly believing myself that it's not, in issues like the COC that we discussed before. You know, it feels like maybe everything is going to come together on the 10th of December and maybe not. That's sort of my overall feeling. And so, yeah, I don't expect the CPC to give me an answer about this specifically right now, frankly. But if you want to offer one, I'll be happy to take it.
Well, I couldn't say on behalf of the CPC, but I could say personally, I think that feels accurate. It probably will. It may come together on the 10th, but the probability wise is no, unless we come back and we get all of these questions that are still at the waiting on board approval to come back, and we get, significant movement on the COC piece really quickly, but odds are not like great.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second issue I had was number 31, and this is as part of the requirements from the CPC, there was a document describing infrastructure changes that were going to be made to the AMP project to disentangle the hosting on the CDN of the runtime from the Google AMP cache. And I mean, this is like a fairly involved technical conversation with lots of decisions to be made. And I think it's important that there is a direct line of communication between folks on the CPC that are going to approve of this plan and the people actually writing the plan. And so my question was, does the CPC prefer a Slack channel on the foundation's Slack or a mailing list for this, or something else?
So that is another good question. We could really easily set up a Slack channel within the OpenJS Foundation workspace to discuss this, and that may be best for just pulling together a group of folks who would be interested in working on this collaboratively with AMP team members. But then we could also document some pieces in a mailing list just for transparency, because those things end up getting, like, a mailing list is archivable and that kind of thing. Either is really doable. I would really want to hear from folks with more background and interest in infra from the CPC. What would be, if you were interested in participating in this discussion, what would be ideal?
So it's a shame Tierney left, because he had lots of points about this.
Yeah, I did. I was just looking over to see if he was still here. Dang it. Anybody? I know Michael Dawson would be interested in this as well.
All right, so maybe this can wait until folks that are actually interested in participating in that conversation actually speak their minds about what would work better for them.
Yeah, this is also something else I can maybe put a call out to CPC folks in the project email, like, hey, if you're interested in participating, raise your hand so we can cat herd you somewhere. Okay, those are good issues. I'm sorry they didn't get generated by the agenda tool. I think Michael ran it yesterday or something. So, but next week they will be captured in the agenda. So I guess that's a good reminder to anybody who has an issue that they'd like to see us address. Please feel free to file that and add the Cross Project Council agenda tag to make sure that we take it up.
I have a question regarding the communication channel, actually.
Yeah.
So Brian Warner, he suggested that we started with the Slack channel. And I also think that starting with the Slack channel is good to set up an agreement between the parties on how to communicate and how the format should be. And then maybe a mailing list would be better in terms of this is a separate concern, whereas you also have a clear boundary of the two parties. If that makes sense. You have a more, probably have a more detailed and accurate conversation through a mailing list rather than a Slack channel where you have more loose language.
Oh, yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, definitely. I think they're good for different things, and you're right. Like a mailing list might be better for being a little bit more precise and focused on documentation than ad hoc Slack.
Yeah,
channel.
and also in these email lists, people are better to answer since the process of answering a mailing list is better than to go to Slack every time.
Mhm.
And that's another good point.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason I actually brought up the mailing list thing was that all of the communications during the application process was the CPC was done through a mailing list. And so I assumed that this was the preferred communication channel in general of the CPC. And I know that folks on the CPC have a lot on their plate and are not really necessarily focused on all the things. And so making it as easy and frictionless for them to be part of that conversation, I think is what I'm trying to achieve.
Personally speaking, I think, sorry, Jory, I think that would be the preferred one, personally speaking as well.
Well, I think that sounds really good. So what would we want to call this particular mailing list, just for clarity? And
Frankly, I mean, before we make a decision about this, I think that hearing from the folks that are actually going to be involved in this conversation and that are not on the call today would be better.
okay.
I don't know if, like, Evan, that's you would agree with this, or if you feel like you hold a good enough feeling for how the room.
No, I'm good. The more people, the better understanding you have. So it's a good choice.
Okay, well, we'll try and get that that feedback collected from CPC members quickly, so we can start organizing on this particular issue, because Toby, to Toby's point, it's a big one, and we want to make sure that the right folks are participating. We are right at the top of the hour, so respecting everyone's time, unless there's any last minute or announcements or anything like that. I may just say let's close.
I actually have an announcement.
Right.
Woo! So we're probably releasing a Webpack CLI beta, hopefully this week, ideally this week, and probably it's going to be next week. So yeah, just keep your eyes open.
Congrats. And definitely let's connect with Rachel on that, so we can do some celebration on the OpenJS blog too.
Yeah, that'd be cool. We spent a lot of time doing this, and I hope that the community will think it's good. Using a lot of time, so hopefully it's worth the effort.
Cool. Go Webpack.
Woo!
All right. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful